Inquire all those questions you've always wanted to know. Ask Kati anything.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ask Kati Anything. I am your host and licensed therapist, Kati Morton. If you don't know who I am, welcome. I have been creating educational mental health content online for many years, like over 10. So today we have 10 questions as per usual. If you're new here, welcome. I get the questions from my podcast channel, which is called Opinions That Don't Matter. That's the name of the podcast I have with my husband, Sean. And over on that channel in the community tab, usually on Sunday mornings, this week I forgot, usually I schedule them just so I don't have to think about them and post them in the moment. I forgot that we were out of scheduled ones, so it was a little bit late and I apologize. But usually Sunday mornings, I will post in there asking for your questions and you can leave them as comments below that post. Okay, without further ado, let's jump into this first question. This question says, "Hi, Kati. Why do I feel like I failed at my illness? I had anorexia for several years and then it morphed into bulimia, but I don't really feel like being bulimic and more of a quote unquote failed anorexic. It really keeps me from wanting to get better and makes me so ashamed. What can I do about it? Being refused treatment because my weight is normal didn't really help. I know my case is specific, but this feeling of failing at a disorder might apply to other cases as well. Thank you for all that you do. Your podcast helps me so much." Oh, I'm so glad. Great question. And I know you're saying it's very specific, but this is also very, very common. I have a ton of patients in general, but I find it more common in eating disorders and self-injury than in other mental illnesses, but it does still happen in other mental illnesses. However, a lot of us can feel like we're not sick enough, or because we didn't get this specific diagnosis, then we've failed. And a lot of my, what used to be called EDNOS, or eating disorder not otherwise specified, now it's called OSFED, or otherwise specified eating or feeding disorder. Who cares what they're called? It's just kind of the catch-all for eating disorders when we don't quite meet the criteria for one of the diagnoses that the DSM is deemed appropriate to be in their book, which, spoilers, the DSM can be trash a lot of times. It helps a little bit, but it's trash a lot also. So anyway, when we don't meet that criteria, we can fall into these other, NOS type diagnoses, like it's otherwise specified, like it just doesn't quite fit. And that can cause us to feel like we aren't a real insert thing. Like I don't have a real eating disorder. I'm not really depressed, right? We just feel like we've fallen into these kind of not real diagnoses. Or we can judge ourselves, like when it comes to self-injury, which you guys know isn't really a diagnosis yet, because again, the DSM can be a hot piece of garbage sometimes. We can think, oh, I'm not sick enough. I don't do it enough. It's not bad enough to warrant help, right? We can have all these judgments. And the reason that happens is because our negative self-talk is so intense that even us in the grips of our eating disorder or our self-injury urges or whatever it is, but let's just stick to eating disorder because that's the question at hand. We're so in it that our eating disorder is taking over all of our thoughts. And we all know our eating disorder only lies, right? It only tells us false things and judges us and puts us down and tells us we're not enough. And it's just another way that it's doing it. So an eating disorder is competitive. It usually looks out and it'll notice any kind of other potential eating disorder behavior. And if we know someone has an eating disorder, hello, eating disorder treatment, eating disorder groups, we know all those other people have eating disorders as well. We can find ourselves like wanting to compete against them or be quote unquote worse off than they are. And if we aren't, which by the way, our eating disorder will never let us see what's really going on. It always tells us that we're not as bad as these other people. Then it will tell us we're not sick enough and we need to try harder and we're failing at this. We're not good enough, right? That's just what it feeds on, and pun intended, right? Our eating disorder is a numb out from something else going on. And so in order for it to numb us out, it has to take over all of our thoughts and brain space. So it's going to find a way to always be around. That's why it's like a chameleon and it weasels its way in, which is why it's hard to get rid of them, not impossible and not something that we can't overcome and recover from. But that's why it's difficult, right? We all know it's difficult. Recovery is fucking hard, worth it. And it is possible, but it's hard, right? Change is hard. And so because that's how eating disorders work, and that's how they're so effective at numbing us out from the trauma in our past or an emotional abuse is trauma. It can be, by the way. I'm just saying, using another example, the emotional abuse we sustained because our parents were so emotionally neglectful and were never around. Like, there's all these different things that can be going on, and we don't have the bandwidth to process it or acknowledge it. And our eating disorder is like, oh, well, you can focus on me instead. And so we do. And it keeps us held by like continuing to judge us, continue to tell us we're not sick enough, not bad enough, and all that jazz. And so that's really why we can feel. Also, I will be honest, from my experience, and I'd love to know from you guys in the comments, I hear a lot from my patients with eating disorders that being anorexic and like super, super thin is like always the ultimate goal. Even if we've always been bulimic or we've always had binge eating disorder, it's like for some reason we think that that's like the only real eating disorder. I don't know. I push back on that all the time, but I've gotten that a lot over the years. And I think it's societally driven. I think it's part of our diet culture and thinking that, when they talk about eating disorders, they usually show super, super thin people, not that we can be any size and shape. So I don't know. But anyways, I think that might be part of it as well. And part of what's feeding into this, I've failed because I don't fit into what I thought was an eating disorder initially. Does that make sense? Okay. Now there was a comment on this and it says, I wonder whether this feeling also applies to self-harm. I already kind of answered that. I sometimes feel like things were never bad enough and I've just been making everything up because it never caused any harm bad enough to need medical attention. It's that same thing. How does it keep us from thinking about the things we don't want to think about and keeping us numbed out? By continuing to pull us deeper and deeper and deeper into it, taking up all of our thoughts and brain space and making it impossible for us to think about anything else. So yeah, it does. And I do want to also talk about the fact that she says, I know my case is specific, but this feeling of failing at the disorder, she was refused treatment because of her weight. That part always pisses me off, and I will never not yell at an insurance company on the phone about this. Unfortunately, a lot of our systems, even in the UK, I've heard from many of you in Canada, in Australia, I don't know about other countries. Hopefully it's different, but in the States and a lot of other countries, our insurance only likes to cover eating disorder treatment when we are underweight, which if we know, most of eating disorders don't cause us to be underweight. So it's bullshit. And we need to push back and we need to fight back. And I've successfully fought back against that. And now that, it's been years now, but now that binge eating disorder is in the DSM, we thought it would be easier. In some cases it is, but a lot of insurances haven't changed their protocols and plans. It's bullshit anyway. And I think that is part of the frustration that I feel, and probably also what feeds into this negative thought spiral and what continues to energize your eating disorder. And so the final question I want to address is, what can I do about it? Tell your therapist that this is happening. Notice the thoughts. Be curious about them. We don't have to judge them. We don't have to change them right away. Just be curious. Start paying attention to what you're telling yourself. And then I want you to start checking your facts. I want you to start finding a way to use bridge statements to argue back. Now, one of these tools might work better than the others. Neither might work, and we might just have to start building up our self-worth, which I have videos about building self-confidence. Those are things like being kind to other people, like giving people compliments, also like building mastery, like working on something and getting better at it. There's a lot of ways that we can do this kind of thing. And so, yeah, anyways, those are just some of my thoughts. Those are some of the ways that we can kind of get out of it. And the most important is just getting that help. If you're not in therapy currently and you're struggling, reach out for help. It's okay to get help and get some support, because we're going to need someone to remind us to do these things like noticing the thoughts, checking the facts, using bridge statements and arguing back and all that good stuff. Okay? And I'm sorry you're going through this. It's shitty. Eating disorders suck, man, but it can and will get better. Okay. Question number 2. It says, hi, Katie. Happy Thursday. Happy Thursday. Is it possible for older teenagers, ages 16 to 19, to be groomed? Also, is grooming always explicitly sexual, or can it be only vaguely sexual or not even sexual at all? Thanks for all that you do. This is a great question. Now, I want to read the way that I define grooming, so there's not like an exact definition, but I'm going to tell you what grooming is. I made some notes so I wouldn't forget. So grooming is really when someone in our life, they're usually older than us, builds a relationship or builds some trust and emotional connection to us in order, and this is the important part, in order to manipulate, exploit, and abuse you. So someone's going to try to build a relationship with us in order to do things that are harmful. Now, you can realize in there that it doesn't have to be, it can be anybody, any age, gender, race, it doesn't matter. People groom people of all ages. So yes, someone from the ages of 16 to 19 could be groomed, and it doesn't always have to be sexual. I know we talk about it a lot when it comes to like sexualization of children, because that's almost always present in sexual abuse cases. However, we can be groomed for a lot of things, right? Manipulate, exploit, and abuse. And the reason it's always just the intent behind it, right? And so they can just groom us to get us to do things for them, or to make things easier in this way or that way, or to get us to stand up for them at work, right? This could be a peer. This could be, so it doesn't really matter. I wish, honestly, it didn't happen at all, but I wish it was more specific and it didn't happen to everybody, no matter what age. We could all be groomed. It's more about the intent behind the relationship, right? Because we can build relationships with people and want to grow closer and get connected and feel emotionally connected to someone. But someone who's grooming someone is only doing that because they want to exploit them, right? They want to manipulate, exploit, or abuse. And yeah. And it's not always someone, again, doesn't matter how old we are. It's not always someone older than us. The power that people can get in situations like this is through that manipulation or ability to coerce, right? That gives them the power. It's not always just age dependent. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense and is clear. So we can be groomed, just to wrap it up, we can be groomed at any age, and it's not always sexual. And it could be, but not always. Okay. And people who do that are dirtbags and deserve to be punished. Okay. Question number 3 says, "Hey, Katie, happy Thursday. What is religious trauma, and how do you know if you've experienced it? I am part of the LGBTQ community, and I am going to church, but it also conflicts my sexuality. I've looked up some of the signs and symptoms, but I'm unsure because I am second guessing myself. I hope this makes sense. Thanks for all that you do." Of course. Okay. I have a video that will probably come out around the time this podcast is coming out, because I have been working on a video all about religious trauma. And I will agree, there's no clear definition about what it is, and it's really confusing to read about. And then, of course, when you're reading about it, there's a lot of churches and other religions who want to talk about it and address it, which I love. But then that can be confusing too, because their goal is usually to keep their parishioners in church and to help them feel heard and understood, when we just want to talk about religious trauma removed from church itself, if that makes sense. So, okay. Religious trauma is honestly like any trauma. So think of the way that we were just talking about grooming, right? When people are manipulating, they're coercing us to do things we wouldn't normally do. They can be abusing us emotionally, is usually what happens in churches, but sometimes sexual abuse. I've heard from many of you that you were taken advantage of by an older person in church. So religious trauma overall is when you're through your religion, they are using tools, and I don't even know what I want to call it, but it's like they are doing things in church, whether it's through the preacher and the pastor giving the sermon, whether it's through the volunteer part of the church, or they're using all parts of the church as a way to emotionally abuse us, meaning that they don't believe there's any room for independent thought. We can be shot down or shamed if we ask a question about something like, how do we know that this happened? Or I'm curious about this story in the Bible and where that came to be, right? Or how come we always have to do all the work for Pastor so-and-so? How come he doesn't put his sermons together? Like, we should be free to ask questions and get answers, and not shamed or told to shut up and sit down and pretty much do what we're told, right? So that lack of support for independent thought is a form of emotional abuse, and usually is how, religious trauma can happen. Another very common way that it can happen is by being told over and over that who we are and what our interests are not supported and are a sin, right? Just who we are in general is a sin. And I want to bring that up because you said you're part of the LGBTQ community. There are amazing and wonderful churches that are LGBTQ allies and, supportive of that community. We had a ton of those in LA that were wonderful, especially for my friends who were gay and wanted to still be a part of a church, because religion and faith was a big part of who they were. It can be incredibly healing. However, not all churches are like that. And some churches think that being gay is a sin. Like, what? And so that is emotional abuse again, and can lead to religious trauma, right? You think of trauma like when what's happening to us is too much for our brain to process, and we fear for our own emotional or physical safety, or the emotional or physical safety of someone else, right? And you can see how that could happen. And I could really, really dig into this, but again, I have a whole video coming out. I am putting the final touches on it right now, and it should be coming out, like I said, probably around the time that this podcast is. So hopefully you are able to go over to my YouTube channel and just look up, Kati Morton religious trauma. It'll pop up, and that will give you a better definition and drill down even deeper into what can cause religious trauma and what it is, because there's just and nobody's talking about it in a real way, and it's hard to understand, and we can, of course, second guess ourselves, and it's hard to break away. I didn't even get into that in the video because there was just not. It was already going to be way, way, way too long, but maybe that's the next installment of it, because breaking away from our church and finding a way to have a healthy spiritual life and healthy faith is part of that healing. Sometimes if we still want that to be part of our lives, then we're going to have to find a way to incorporate it healthfully. And you can do that through, there are actual therapists. There was this website. I don't even know if I included it in the video, but I can put it in the description. There's a website where you can look up therapists who deal specifically with religious trauma, and just having a therapist who is supportive of you and supportive of your process and helps you heal through it will be just so key in your recovery. And if you even think that you're suffering from religious trauma, you most likely are. I know a lot of us think that the symptoms have to be this bad and we have to be feeling that way. I'm here to tell you, so often, 99% of the time, people wait too long to get help. They wait for way too many months or years to reach out and speak up. And the sooner we do, the better. So if you're thinking this is something you're going through, please reach out, speak up, and get some support, because it'll get better more quickly. And I'm telling you, you don't have to feel bad first in order for it to feel better, or for you to warrant getting help. Okay. Moving on. Question number 4. It says, "Hi, Kati. This will be a long question. It's not that long. Don't worry. Sorry for asking for your time." See, look, you can take up space and time. No need to apologize. I was talking about people pleasing a couple weeks ago. And here, this is a good example of something that I used to do. I'm just calling you out that you don't need to apologize to me. I will gladly give you my time. Here in the Netherlands, I am 30 years out of treatment because they didn't want to help me anymore. The reason why is because I was too complex and the risk of killing myself was too high. Now I've been following for almost 2 years therapy via Skype with a therapist from Canada. It's going way better. Sounds like maybe in the Netherlands, whatever that treatment place you were in, wasn't actually helpful and doesn't know how to treat suicidality, or potentially, I don't know if you have borderline personality disorder, but a lot of my BPD patients have been told this in the past, and it's just shame because people just don't understand. Okay. Now, it's going way better. My old psychiatrist is helping me here in the Netherlands with medication. But every time I see her, I feel so scared. She's very kind, but she's also one of those people who gave up on me. And it still hurts. Of course. Do you have some advice for me? There's no other psychiatrist here that wants to help me because they still believe that I'm too sick to survive. Euthanasia is here and is very normal too if you suffer too long and too much. I hope you can give me some advice. Thanks for all that you do. Much love from Cynthia. Cynthia, I am so sorry that you have such trash treatment over there and that they just want to give up on you. And then you have the option of taking your own life through euthanasia. And I know that let's not get into that and the beliefs around that. But when it comes to mental illnesses, I believe that the treatment facilities and the mental health professionals need to do better, because we can do better. And often people are just negligent, and it really pisses me off. And so, okay. I'm glad that you're seeing the therapist in Canada. With your psychiatrist, I would bring this up with her. I don't know if you feel able, but I honestly think it'd be fair to say to her, hey, sometimes you're so kind, and thank you so much for continuing to see me. Excuse me. However, I struggle sometimes coming in because I feel like, you gave up on me. And I really need to talk about that because I need to process what happened. And that's really the truth. And maybe that's something nix that. I take that back. You could bring it up with your psychiatrist. I think that could be helpful, but you're going to want to process it through with your therapist from Canada. And the reason being is a psychiatrist usually, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the States, they don't give us that much time. So it's like, we want to go in and tell them how we're feeling and what's happening with our medication. And you could bring up, sometimes I struggle to come here because I feel like you kind of gave up on me. And I'm really grateful that you're seeing me now, but I just want you to know I'm working through that in therapy. You can bring that up and that gives her an opportunity to talk about it with you, which I hope she will offer. And then at least gives you a space to then prepare and practice with your therapist what you want to say, maybe in more detail, and you can say it to your psychiatrist or work on conversations so that, you can have maybe a healing interaction. Because the fact that your psychiatrist is still seeing you tells me that she believes there is some hope, but I want you to hear that from her. And I think spending time in our therapy sessions to kind of process, people don't realize if we've been super suicidal or if we've attempted to take our own life, that's a trauma, right? Fearing for our own emotional or physical safety could be trauma. Yeah. It's traumatizing. Not to mention, a lot of times I've had patients who feel like they need to grieve the fact that they weren't able to do it or pulled out the last minute or survived or whatever. There's grieving in there too. And I know that seems kind of complicated and people might think, Katie, how are you supposed to support that? I'm not supporting that decision. I'm supporting the healing from it so that it doesn't happen again. And just giving yourself an opportunity to talk to your therapist about it and process it through will be really key and really healing. And talking about that trauma, because that's really what it was. I hope that helps. I hope that's some of the advice you were looking for and it's something you can do. But again, bring it up with your therapist first. Role play, get prepared so that you can bring it up with your psychiatrist, because we want to be prepared when we go in, since they don't usually give us, or at least in the States, more than like 15, 20 minutes. And I want to make sure that you can at least say what you need to say in that amount of time. Okay. Get a drink of water. Let's move on to question number 5. It says, hi, Katie. I'm wondering if you have any suggestions of what to tell a friend when they ask how they can help. That's a good question. I have a wonderful friend who's been very supportive in listening to me talk about my anxieties and other mental health concerns. But when she asks what she can do to help me, I have no idea. I know this is kind of a weird question because it's asking you to say what I would want, but I never know how to answer that myself. Happy Thursday to you and Roxy. Oh, she's actually outside running like a lunatic this morning. Okay. And then there's a follow-up on this, but let's get into this first. So when a friend asks how they can help, let's be honest. Now, keep in mind that a friend can't make us feel better. They can't make things all of a sudden magically go away. But here's what we can tell them. We can figure out what would be helpful and supportive when we're feeling down. Meaning, maybe we have like a code, right? We text them a certain emoji when we just want them to just come over and sit with us, right? We need to come up with some things that they can do that feel good. It might be them texting or calling to check in. It might be them just showing up and watching TV with us, right? We don't have to talk about things. They don't have to have answers. We just need them to show up for us. Or is it just them checking in, like the calls and texts? Hey, how are you? No, really, what's going on? This is what I went through today. How are you doing? Thinking about the ways that they can support and then letting them know those is really all that they need to know. And if you can have some kind of code that makes it easy for you to communicate that need or want, that would be amazing. And then another thing, if you struggle with triggers and you find yourself, suffering from PTSD or anything that comes along with triggers, which really could be any kind of mental illness, if we get triggered a lot, what could they do to pull you out? Or if you struggle with panic attacks or dissociation, are there certain things that friend could assist us with? Meaning, could they try to get us to count the colors in the room? Could they touch us on the back? Would that be okay? Could they remind us to drink cold water or give us a cold washcloth? Or what could they do, right? Let's think of some of the ways that they can support when we're in those modes and we need someone to help keep us grounded. What could they do? Or are there certain things we want them to avoid doing, right? Like when you or I don't know, like when you raise your voice and you're trying to be heard in a conversation, I get really triggered, or I don't even know what it would be. Everyone's triggers are different. But if it's something they cannot do, like, oh, that perfume reminds me of my abuser. Can you not wear it? Okay. Right. There are some things that we can ask someone to not do. Now, I do want to throw in there again that our friends are not our saviors. They can't make us feel better or get better, but they can be supportive and improve our mood. And it just feels good to feel connected so that we know we're not alone and we don't feel so isolated, right? And so maybe, or hopefully, that kind of sparked some ideas for you and got you kind of thinking on the ways that your friend could help, and just start writing some things down. Maybe keep it in the notes on your phone, so when they ask you next time how they can help, you're like, you know what, I was thinking about that the other day. Let me get into my notes. I'll tell you some of these ways that you can help. And if they ask, I'm just here if anybody's like, oh, but I could never really ask them for anything because like I'm not worthy, because hello, negative self-talk, right? I want you to know they're asking, and when someone asks, that's because they want to help. And so let's give them that support and give them an opportunity to show up for us, right? Because it's kind of that like give and take in relationships. Like if a friend wants to give to us, it's best for us to take. Like, sorry, my brain kind of went over here for a second, so bear with me, because I was just thinking of, imagine, when you want to give someone a gift or you want to pay for something and someone won't let you. I know that sounds kind of silly, but let's say I'm out to lunch with one of my girlfriends. I'm like, no, I want to get it. And she's like, no, I refuse to let you do that. And like throws her card to the waiter after I've already put my card into the thing. She's like, split it kind of thing. That doesn't allow me to do what I wanted to do. And it's not, I know it seems like, but you don't have to do that, but I want to. And that's what the friend is saying, is like, I want to help you. Just let me help you. And so if we have some ways and things that they can do to support and help, it's great to have those things on tap and be able to read that list. So if any of you in your mind are thinking like, oh, I can't let them help me, then I'll be forever indebted. No. They want to do something for you. Let them do it. And it's best if you let them know how. Otherwise, they're kind of stumbling around in the dark and they could inadvertently make things worse. So I know I could get on a tangent, and sorry, my brain was a little scattered there because I all of a sudden was like, oh my God, it's like my grandma was telling me, and this will be my last little story. My grandma was telling me recently, because my mom wanted to help my brother with stuff, and I always get frustrated because I'm like, he's a grown adult, mom. He can do it on his own. You don't have to help him. He can figure it out, right? Because I'm a grown adult and I don't need her help. And my grandma was telling me, she's like, your mom wants to help you and your brother because she's your mother, and you need to let her help. She's like, you don't have to fight back so hard, Katie. Let people support you. She wants to, and she wants to do the same for your brother. And I was like, oh yeah, I should like accept this assistance. So know that I struggle with it too. It's my own stuff, but I just want to put it out there that like, if someone's asking how they can help, let's give them some ways to really do it. And there was a comment on this that said, also, if you're the person asking, how can I help? And your friend just says, I don't know, or nothing, how can you help? You can offer up some of the things that I said. You can say, well, would it be helpful if I just showed up, let's say, every other Friday and we just watch TV? Would that be beneficial? Or do you want me to call and text you every couple days just to check in? Or want to make some plans together? Plans can be really helpful if we're struggling with depression or suicidal thoughts. Plans are good. Even if we might try to cancel, it's just good to like try to create those plans. Offer some of those things and then just see what resonates with them. Or are there things that I can do when you're starting to feel anxious? Like, touch, does that help? Or things I can say, we can kind of prompt it. But again, the responsibility is not on us to come up with what helps them best. It's on them to tell us, because we can't read their minds, right? But you can bring up some of those things, and hopefully that will start them, the wheels turning, and they'll be able to think and come up with some ways that we can help. Okay? Let's move on to question number 6. And this question says, we hear a lot about transference, but I haven't heard many people speak on erotic transference. What is a driving factor behind erotic transference? Have you ever had a client be open with you about theirs? And do therapists ever get erotic counter-transference? Thank you. Now, I have a whole video about this. I think it's called like Help, I Have a Crush on My Therapist. Or if you just look on YouTube, Katie Morton Crush on Therapist, it should pop up. I talk about erotic transference in that. Now, if anybody's wondering what this is, transference itself is when we are in therapy and we transfer another relationship that we have in our lives onto our therapist, meaning that I would maybe treat my therapist like I had my father. Let's say I used to fight with my dad a lot or something, or maybe even like because my dad died when I was 24, that grieving process and me being angry for him not being here, I could take it out on my therapist and treat them like they're him, right? So that's transference. Very, very common. Happens in almost every therapeutic relationship. Counter-transference, on the flip side, is when I, as the therapist, act out of that transference, meaning I don't act therapeutically. I act like that person that you're treating me like. Remember, like if you're treating me like your father, I'm going to act like your father. If you're treating me like that spouse that never showed them love, you're going to lash out back. And that reaction from your therapist is not healthy. It's really, really, really bad. And as a therapist, we're supposed to be in our own therapy, be talking with other clinicians about difficult cases and taking care of ourselves so that that doesn't happen. Now, okay, so now that we kind of understand what those words are, erotic transference is essentially when we transfer on romantic thoughts or erotic thoughts onto our therapist and act. We'll often think we have a crush on our therapist, or thinking that we want to date them, or that they're the love of our life, or that we want to get married. They're the only person who understands us. It can go in a lot of different directions. Okay, so erotic transference is also very common, and it comes out of a lot of different, or it comes from a lot of different reasons or a lot of different backgrounds. Now, the first and the most common that I found in my patients is attachment. Especially coming out of abuse, we can have neglectful parents, so we never formed a healthy attachment. Also, if we were like sexually abused or physically abused or emotionally abused, we can think that love looks in a really unhealthy way, right? Or we don't know how to have relationships in a way that isn't sexual, especially if we were like sexually exploited from a young age. So that can drive it. We can also have struggled with relationships, again, back to attachment, and not have had many friendships. And so we don't really know what a healthy relationship looks like, and we can confuse it for love. So that can be very, very, and I mean, romantic love. Love in relationships is healthy. Now, so there's that component. Then there's also the component of, and I've talked about this in relation to why we can stay in like sexually abusive situations, or why a lot of times we are like, we have trauma bonds and we're connected to our abuser. And that's because we can feel like, oh, out of everybody, they picked us. And so it's kind of that like feeling unique and you're all unique, by the way, but feeling that a sexual connection is the only way that we can be important or be valued. And so in order to continue the relationship with our therapist, we think that it has to be romantic in some way. So there's those two components. And then the final reason that I find, at least in my experience or in what I've researched and what I've read over the years, is that it can be a struggle with boundaries, because we can be, again, it's kind of going back to attachment, because a lot of my disorganized type attachment-based people will really struggle with like this push-pull relationship, no relationship. They won't know how to categorize it or how to protect themselves and others in relationships. And so they'll overstep boundaries by, feeling romantically connected to the therapist. Does that make sense? And it all is kind of born out of attachment, trauma, and abuse, and how we're trying to make sense of it now. And I have had one client be open with me about theirs, meaning they said that they had a crush on me, or that they wanted to date me, or that they thought that, something about me was like perfect for them, blah, blah, blah. And it's really helpful. As uncomfortable as it may feel for you, it's actually, again, very common and it's easier for you to bring it up than the therapist to try to dig into it, because we can be really defensive and not want to talk about it and be embarrassed. But your therapist is probably aware, and talking about it helps us better understand where it's coming from and heal the wound that this is born out of, meaning like from the abuse, or because of, the lack of healthy boundaries growing up, or feeling the need to feel like we're special and not being able to have that come from within, right? And then that'd be like self-worth, confidence, and all the stuff that we work on there. It just gives us more information so that we kind of can work together. It gives us a better path towards healing for you. And so I have had a client be open about it. It was really helpful in the healing process and something that we worked on. And I think it helped us move more quickly forward. And it also grew our therapeutic relationship in a more healthy way for them to understand like what's involved in a therapeutic relationship and what is not. And therapists should not get erotic counter-transference. I can personally say I never have. There's so much wrong with that. First of all, the power dynamic is off. They know nothing about you as the therapist, and you know everything about them. That's not a healthy relationship when it comes like outside of therapy, right? Especially a romantic relationship. And the therapist is supposed to be the one that's helping the other. And so then is that relationship deemed to be like helper and the like person that you're trying to fix, like the helpless. I don't know. The dynamic is completely off. And I think that there is no place for that ever. And if a therapist is feeling that, please get into your own therapy, talk to other clinicians about it and work through it, because it shouldn't be happening. Counter-transference in general shouldn't be happening. Okay, and there was a question at the end of this. It said, as an add-on question, what can you do to get over it if you experience this with your therapist and you would never ever discuss it with them? Oh, and there's actually one more add-on behind this, or after that, I guess. And to be honest, I know this is frustrating, but it's best if you can bring it up with them and you discuss it with them, because they can help you to figure out where it comes from. Now, you can do some of your own self-discovery. You can kind of be curious about where this is coming from for you. Like I mentioned, a lot of the reasons that it happens are those things that you struggle with. And then you can bring those things up in therapy, say like attachment, something that you're working on, or you wonder if you've been traumatized in your life and you'd like to, potentially work on that. There can be a lot of things like that. Or, do we struggle with boundaries in relationships, right? You can bring up some of those things with them and work through it, because it's not actually about the crush that we have on our therapist or the erotic transference, as we call it. It's really about like something else. And so if we can figure out what that something else is on our own, we can bring that up in therapy and work to process through, because by doing that work, that crush will go away. Okay. Now there was another question on this. Says, hey, Katie, as an add-on, can people have transference coming from multiple places? Like, can we transfer feelings from a few broken relationships into our life, like our mother and another one? Of course, transference can come from a lot of different places. And often I find, and this, I could be wrong, but in my experience, I find that they come, like you said, a lot of broken relationships, like a few of them, they usually have a pattern to them. And that's why we kind of like put them all onto our therapist. Sometimes not. And I've had patients who will like have transference through one relationship, and then like a few months later, it'll be a different kind of thing that they're hitting me with. So that can happen too. But I find often that we transfer these feelings from like a few different relationships, but they all have this similar pattern. And we tend to react out of them or put it onto our therapist and do that transference kind of act over and over as a way to kind of process it and find a healthier way. So anyway, long story short is, yes, it can come from multiple places. Yes, transference can come at all sorts of different times, can come and go. And yes, we can transfer from, a few broken relationships in our life. And you'll honestly be surprised sometimes when they're triggered and when we find ourselves doing it. Like I said, 1 month it can be one person, another month it can be another. So whatever your process is, just know that that's okay. Okay, let's move on to question number 7. This says, hey, Katie, I want to stop living my life through the gaze of trauma. After watching your videos and listening to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast, I realized that I've experienced more trauma than I thought, and I am now validating it. Yay. I mean, I'm sorry that you had to go through that, but the validation key part of is such a core component of healing. It says, thank you for your help in that. Of course, I'm glad I could be any small part of this. I feel like I can finally recognize the harm in my childhood without deeming my experiences as small and without seeing my emotionally neglectful parents as bad or justifying their actions like a middle zone. The thing is, I'm also realizing that a lot of my life goals, decisions, and wants are influenced by the trauma that I've gone through. I can't afford therapy, but I do have access to free counseling, limited to 12 sessions. I know that counseling is not the same as therapy, and trauma work can be emotionally intense. So I don't know if a counselor is going to be able to do trauma work in that way and in that limited time. Would it be wise for me to go into counseling for my trauma, or should I wait till a possible and distant future, 2+ years, where I can have access to a psychologist or psychotherapist? If not, what are some things that I can do or resources I can use to help in the time being? Thank you for all your help. This is a great question. Now, someone asked below this, said, what's the difference between a counselor and a therapist? And the person who asked this question said counselors are short-term where they are and therapists are more long-term. Now, in the States, it's a little bit different. Like I talked about on a previous podcast, in the state of California, I learned one of my professors reached out and was like, hey, in your book, you didn't say that counselors can't diagnose. I guess in California at that time, they couldn't diagnose when my book came out in 2018. I don't know if that has changed, but overall, it wouldn't feel any different to anybody out there if you're seeing a licensed therapist, a licensed counselor, or a licensed social worker. As long as they're licensed, it's usually around the same type of feel for you and roughly the same training. We have different focuses, but roughly the same training. So because you only get 12 sessions, I wonder if they can extend those. I'd be very curious. But for right now, it's tricky. This is tricky because 12 sessions isn't that many, but it's not that few either. So part of me feels like I would want you to go into it for your trauma. And I want you to start talking through certain things that are really bothering you. If you're able to kind of cut the crap in your therapy, meaning, and I mean that in the most loving way. I mean that if you're able to dig right in, not everybody's able. It can be overwhelming. It can be re-traumatizing. I'm not encouraging you to move too fast, right? If you're able to do that, then I think the 12 sessions could be super beneficial. I think you'll be able to kind of get in, jump in, and get to work. Now, are we going to be healed in 12 sessions? Most likely not. But I think we can get some tools and techniques. We can better understand our triggers and ways to build resilience. And we can kind of have things to help us move forward so that in the 2+ years in the distant future, hopefully sooner than that, whenever we can get in to see a therapist and start really working on this stuff. And I don't know, it sounds like your parents were emotionally neglectful. I think The Emotionally Absent Mother is an amazing book. There's also The Unavailable Father, another amazing book. They're all in my Amazon store. So if you go to amazon.com/shop/Kati Morton, you can find all those books. Also, my new book, Traumatized, is available now. In the first chunk of it, like the first 4 or 5 chapters, is more about understanding trauma and what it is. And then the second half, so there's 15 chapters in this. The second half is about healing, finding the right treatment, ways to build resilience, how to talk about what happened, and it's all the process-based stuff. And so I think that could be beneficial and could be a resource for you as you work through on your own, because the way to make those 12 sessions really get the maximum amount of support out of them would be to do some of the work on the outside from you. Like outside a session every night, you should be doing something to, whether it's reading a book, whether it's doing some kind of, worksheet or something like that. We can maximize those 12 weeks and really get us to a point where hopefully we feel less reactive. We have some tools and techniques. That would be my goal for you, and feel better able to handle life until we can get into therapy more long term. So those are the 2 books I think would be helpful. 3 really. So Unavailable Father, Emotionally Absent Mother, and my new book, Traumatized. I think those could all be really helpful. My first book, Are You Okay?, has a lot of tools and techniques in it as well. Although it's not really trauma specific. It's more like mental health in general. But yeah, those are just some resources and things that hopefully will help you get through. I think let's use these 12 sessions. Let's get into it. I don't think you should wait 2+ years before working on this. I think we should get in now and do it. And then I'd also ask when you're in counseling if they can extend those sessions. So often they can. I had free sessions through my EAP. God, it was back 13 years ago, right around when my dad died. And I was supposed to only get 6 sessions, and they extended and extended and extended. And I don't even remember how many free sessions I got out of that, but I got a lot. So it never hurts to ask. Okay. Let's move on to question number 8. This question says, "Hi, Kati, do you need a different type of therapy if you're autistic than if you're not?" Good question. I recently spoke to a therapist because of self-harm and a worsening idea that everyone dislikes me, even though I have no reason to think so. Okay, so that's negative self-talk and lack of self-worth. And that can be related to our autism as well. When it became relevant to one of her questions, I said that I have Asperger's, and she immediately said that she can't help me. What? Instead, she said that I should join a group for autistics. What? Okay, we'll get into this. Sorry, I'll keep reading. Said that I should join a group for autistic students, and I felt like she tried to end the call as fast as possible. It felt like she didn't think I could have any problem that's not, I'm lonely because I'm autistic, and I don't think that group will help. It just seemed like a place to hang out and have fun, not discuss self-harm. Now, there was a comment on this. I'm just going to read through both of these because they're all connected. It says, "I've had this issue too, with being turned away from mental health care for my entirely separate concern, or for an entirely separate concern. I was coming in for multiple times. For example, I needed and was seeking residential DBT. And they had residential DBT, but they turned me away because I'm autistic, and they said they weren't sure they could accommodate me after an hour of an intake and conversation on the phone when they didn't know I was autistic the whole time, or they seemed to have any concerns about what needs I may have, being capable of being accommodated up until they asked for my diagnoses. They had seemingly no problems up until that moment. And I'm wondering why so many therapists won't help autistic people, even if they're not coming to therapy for their autism, but for the type of therapy that a therapist specializes in treating. They seem to willingly individualize their treatments to adapt to their clients' best interests all the time. Why is it that they don't even give us the same grace so often? Why won't they see us when they treat what we are asking for help with? Because we're autistic. Additionally, with the treatment of autism, I am such an intellectualizer, and I don't have any cognitive distortions or untrue negative beliefs surrounding my trauma per my last therapist. And for this reason, it was really difficult to work on the hypervigilance issue that I have around it when it isn't tied to any logical fallacy that can be corrected. Is there a good trauma therapy modality to tackle this concern that doesn't really rely on changing my thoughts surrounding the trauma? Does exposure therapy work on this? Okay. So that at the end is kind of a separate question that we'll get into later. But overall, you don't need a different type of therapy if you're autistic. That's not like a hard and fast rule. I do want to say that a lot of therapists, and this happens with eating disorders and self-injury as well. My patients with borderline personality disorder have found this to be true as well. When there's such a specialization, so there are clinicians that specialize in the treatment of autism, just like there are clinicians that specialize in the treatment of eating disorders, such as myself, self-injury, such as myself, borderline personality disorder, such as myself. We're very focused, and we tend to, honestly, I could have filled my entire practice with just those patients because a lot of people don't see them because of a stigma around it. Like a lot of people think BPD patients are just going to get overly attached and threaten to kill themselves. It's not true, but a lot of people believe that. When it comes to autistic patients, a lot of people believe that you need to have been trained specifically in it, even if they're not coming to you for help with their autism. And if you don't understand it, then you would be what's called like it's out of our scope of practice, meaning like I don't have the proper training to help this person, and therefore I can't see them. Now, here are my thoughts about it. So that's my only understanding as to why it would be happening, but here are my thoughts. Now, I would not be able to treat someone who is autistic if they're coming to me for help with their autism, with the symptoms of autism that they're struggling with the most. I am not trained in that. I wouldn't feel like I was the best fit. And I actually have a wonderful psychologist in LA that I used to refer to all the time because that was her specialty. So I would refer out. And that would be why, because I don't have those tools or techniques, and that wouldn't, it wouldn't be working, and I couldn't help you, and I wouldn't feel good about it. It'd be unethical for me to keep seeing you or to actually see you at all. Now, on the flip side, if you came to me for self-injury issues and eating disorder struggles, which, spoilers, I have had a lot of patients who have comorbidity with autism, like they have ASD or autism spectrum disorder and struggle with an eating disorder. And then I see them because I specialize in eating disorder treatment. I usually will request if they're, depending on the level of how affected they are by their autism, is it creating the eating disorder, what feeds into it, I'll want to understand all of that stuff because we may need to have another clinician on board as well, but there's nothing to stop me from helping them with their eating disorder or self-injury urges, or maybe even any symptoms of BPD, right? Those are all within my wheelhouse. Depression, anxiety, things that I can treat all the time. I will see them. I think a lot of therapists don't understand things, and when they don't understand, because they're people too, right? They're not educated about it, then they make stigmatizing judgments like, oh, can't see you, oh, can't go into residential DBT. Like, that really frustrates me, and I'm sorry that that's happening. And I feel like the more we talk about this, the better, because it's my feeling that we should be able to treat you for what you're struggling with. If the autism becomes, so this is just my thought process. So I would see you, and let's say we're working through an eating disorder that you've struggled with since you were a teenager, and let's say in your late 20s now, and coming to see me. And I know that you have autism spectrum disorder, and you've, gotten help for your stuff when you were a child, and you had help with, any autistic symptoms that were uncomfortable for you or whatever it may be, right? You've already gotten support in that way. However, if we were working together and the eating disorder stuff was coming along and we're really challenging it, and then, we found how intertwined it was with your autism, and I felt like in some ways it was over my head, I could do one of two things. Number one, I could refer you out to see someone who specializes while continuing to see you at the same time in conjunction, or I could do my own research, read up on it, and try to get myself to a point where I felt like it then was within my scope of practice. Does that make sense? It's like I can try my best to educate and coordinate with other clinicians who do specialize. I might do some consulting and pay for consultation from someone who specializes so that I can get make sure that I'm being ethical in your treatment, because I think the thing is, as a therapist, you don't want to treat someone that you don't essentially have the business treating. Like, I don't understand it. I didn't train in it. So therefore it's not really ethical for me to treat it. And you always want to make sure that you are working within your scope of practice. And so that would be where that's coming from and the concerns. But I don't understand why I'd be like, oh, you're autistic, can't see you. I wouldn't act that way. It'd be more, I mean, maybe it's just how I am as a therapist, but I always have conversations with my patients. Like, even my patients who have suicide attempts in the past, I walk them through immediately, like, what's going to happen if I think they're at risk again. Here's a safety plan, put that in place right away. Here are the steps we're going to take. And when it comes to this, like, I would talk it out with you. I would say, hey, here are my concerns. These are the things I can help you with. Unfortunately, I'm not trained in the treatment of ASD. I'm happy to read up on a book if there's something that you recommend. But if it tiptoes too much into that space, then we're either going to have to find another clinician to work in conjunction with, possibly refer you out to see them, or, those are our steps, right? And I would just be honest and open about it and communicate that so that there weren't any surprises. That would be my goal. So I'm sorry that that's happening. This is probably something we need to talk about more, because that shouldn't be happening. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Now, the final question was like talking about that, I'm such an intellectualizer, right? So talking about trauma and autism, and additionally, right, I'm an intellectualizer. I don't have any cognitive distortions or untrue negative beliefs surrounding my trauma, but you intellectualize it, right? It's really difficult to work on the hypervigilance issue that I have around it when it isn't tied. Because it's not, you can't logic your way out of it, which I find not funny, but like the irony of it, because intellectualization is a cognitive distortion. It is a false way of thinking, right? And so your normal go-to defense isn't working because PTSD it doesn't make any sense. It's not logical, right? It's emotional. And so exposure therapy could work on this, right? Exposing ourselves to the triggers and working to calm ourselves down. But I also would encourage you to maybe dig into your urge to why it's so comfortable to intellectualize things, and what it would mean, or what it did mean when I just told you that this isn't an intellectual problem, not a logical problem. It's an emotional one, and like a body memory one. What comes up for you with that? And I think The Body Keeps the Score is an amazing book that I would highly encourage you pick up and read. And it's so, even in this question, is there a good trauma therapy modality to tackle this concern? We're just so all about it. It's like, not that that's like intellectualization, but it's just, sometimes we just have to feel it. We have to recognize why this is coming up for us, and why, like, the hypervigilance you're feeling, where is it coming from? Is it a fear of safety? Is it a fear of security? Is it a body memory that we have? Is it, what's the trigger? Can we track that back? That might work to your benefit, right? We can use a little bit of our intellectualization to try to be a detective about it. It doesn't always have to have a logical connection, but can we make sense of it within our own history? That's all I'm asking. So be a detective about this. I think exposure therapy definitely could work to help you out with this. But again, a lot of times these hypervigilance responses and being on edge is more of an emotional, it's like we're in fight flight all the time, and we have to find ways to calm our system down. So it has nothing to do with logicking it out. And then secondly, we have to be curious about what's triggering this. Like, really, is it a certain emotion that comes up for us? We can use our five senses. Is it one of these five senses that's triggering it? What's going on? Let's be curious, and that will give you more information and help you work through it. Okay, let's move on to question number 9. It says, hi, Katie, I hope you're doing well. Why is it that when you start trauma work, things seem to get worse? My psychologist got me to write out a list of events, scenarios of what happened in my life, and what has happened in my life that I would feel like I would blow. I struggled immensely with this because I don't like opening up and being vulnerable. Who does, right? But I pushed myself to do it. Yay! It was now 4 pages long and still going, but I still don't feel like it's warranting the way that I'm feeling. Oh, look at that invalidation and minimization. My emotions have been on the holidays for a long time now. So could this be the reason why I'm feeling this way? Yes, I think you're feeling overwhelmed because you haven't felt in a long time. Like you said, your feelings have been on holiday for a long time, and we finally brought them back. And so any feeling is going to feel like a lot because frankly, we're not used to allowing it. And so it's okay to let yourself feel it. I'm also wondering if it's normal or common to pick up old unhealthy coping skills when starting this type of work, and would my psychologist know? I've off and on since a teen been struggling with eating, never received help for it or a diagnosis or anything. Self-harm, suicidal thoughts and attempts, and I'm too scared to mention anything to my psychologist, mainly about my eating and self-injury, even though she's truly amazing and I trust her more than anyone in my life. How can I overcome this? I've tried writing it down and practicing saying it out loud over and over, but I end up freezing, and I have voices in my head literally screaming at me to not go there, and they cause a lot of noise. I feel like I'm going crazy. I'm tired of feeling this way. Any tips would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for all that you do in the community. Has helped me so much. Of course, I'm so glad it's been beneficial. So let's answer a few of these questions. Now, when you start trauma work, the reason it gets worse before it gets better. And I've described this in the past. It's like when we have a trauma happen, it's like our brain opens up this big walk-in closet and starts shoving shit in it because it can't make sense of what took place, right? We've talked about how inside out, where when we have like a regular day that isn't trauma-based, our brain creates this like narrative, meaning a story about it. Today I got up, I recorded the podcast, I had lunch, I did my little yoga, I talked to my mom, right? It puts this story together, wraps it up nicely, and files it away in our long-term memory. However, trauma memories aren't neat and tidy like that. Sometimes we don't even remember certain things fully, right? We can only remember a bit and piece from this part and then a bit and piece from this part, and it's all scrambled, right? Or we can feel like that whole thing didn't happen at all. We just have body memories of it. So all of that mess gets shoved into that big, deep closet that we've created. And we just kind of shut the door and pile it up, right? And then we get into trauma therapy, and it's like we empty out that closet onto our floor and we try to piece it together and make sense, to put it into those cohesive narratives. And for a long while, sometimes we have that mess on the floor. And it's not stuffed away and hidden away where we don't have to feel it, right? It's out, it's there. And we're like, ugh. And so that's why it feels worse at the beginning, because we have that mess that we have to start kind of piecing together, putting it into narrative form and filing away cleanly. Now, okay. So then the emotions, I explained the emotions on holidays and how anything's going to feel overwhelming because we haven't let ourselves feel them at all. And yes, it's normal for your eating disorder and self-injury urges to come back because those are the ways that you've probably coped. That's probably some of the ways that you kept your emotions on holiday and stuffed it down, numbed out. Focus on that instead, not that. And when we feel triggered, which trauma therapy unfortunately is triggering, they're going to come back with a vengeance. They're like, wait, I'm here. I'll help you numb out. I'll help you forget. Don't worry, I got this. And they come in, and those urges can be strong. So please tell your psychologist. I know we get scared. We think, oh, they're going to put me in the hospital. They're going to overreact, or they're going to not react at all and tell us it's not that big of a deal, which can be horribly invalidating and minimizing. So what I encourage you to do is to tell your therapist that you have these things you used to use as a kid, and you find the urges coming back, and they haven't been back in years. And, and I'd even say, like, I don't want it to be minimized or invalidated. I know these are real issues. I wanted to let you know about them. And sometimes I've struggled with eating, and I've self-harmed in the past and had suicidal thoughts, and going through this trauma work has made those things come back a little bit. How do I overcome these? How do I work through it? Right? We're coming to them for support and help and understanding, which is what their job is, right? That's my job. And so practicing out what you want to say, maybe we write it out, like put it in our notes on our phone, or write it out by hand, bring it into our session and just read from it. If we can email our therapist, we can do that. There can be a lot of ways to get this stuff out so that we don't feel like we're stuck with it and we're alone with it, because it's very, very normal. They come out to help us, right? They're our numb out companions. They're like, this is a lot of feeling. No, right? But that doesn't mean that we can't fight back and that we can't prevent ourselves from using those unhealthy coping skills. And another way to even not use those unhealthy coping skills is to go to my video, 25 coping skills on YouTube, and find some healthier versions to help you manage. And I love the impulse log. I talk about it on there. It's in my book, Traumatized. I love an impulse log. That could be beneficial as well. I hope that helps. You got this. And all that you're going through is very normal. It's what's to be expected when we're working through trauma. So you don't have to judge yourself. We're just doing our best. Okay. Now I had someone write a letter in. We have a question from an actual written letter. You guys, you remember written letters in the mail, snail mail. Our 10th and final question says, "Hi, Katie. What causes someone like myself to get stuck in or with suicidal ideation? Is it because I haven't worked through every aspect of the trauma? Or is it because I'm constantly being triggered? I'm just not understanding why I can't seem to get rid of the suicidal ideation. Furthermore, how does one go about reversing a suicide plan? Since most plans take time to think through and prepare for, it's not like I'm going to wake up one morning and magically not want to end my life. In time and with healing, I can see that I may choose to not end my life, but how would you advise I go about reversing my plans without giving up my supplies just yet?" Great questions. Okay, now we get stuck in suicidal ideation for many reasons. It could be trauma related. It could be because you haven't worked through every aspect. Only you will know that, because if you constantly feel like you're triggered, then you haven't worked through it all, because we're still hypervigilant. We still have a lot of those symptoms of PTSD. So we're going to need more tools and resources. And so if we're being triggered, our suicidal ideation, just like self-injury, eating disorders, shopping addiction, drug and alcohol addiction, it can be our way. It's like our out, our numb out. I mean, I know it seems very extreme and people are like, why would you think that way? Because it feels hopeless and we feel helpless. And when we're triggered a lot and we feel like we can't manage and there's no other way to cope, we can feel like that's our only way to cope. I'm here to tell you that it's not, but that's the way our brain has been thinking and it's wired. And so it's going to take a while to unwire it. So I think that you probably haven't worked through all of your trauma, and that's why you're being constantly triggered. And that's why the suicidal ideation is still there. Now, we don't have to reverse our suicide plan. What we have to do is to put in place a safety plan that we commit to utilizing before taking any action. Now, I have a whole video about suicide safety plans. You can look on my YouTube, just Katie Morton safety plan. It should pop up. I think I actually might have 2 of them, or maybe more. But put one of those together with your therapist. And I think instead of thinking that you have to wake up one morning and not want to end your life, what if instead we considered today? I've had patients just make daily or hourly commitments to not taking their own life. Depends on where we're at and how severe this is. Usually for outpatient, meaning not in the hospital or not in a treatment facility, daily is my goal. If they can't do a daily commitment, then I think they need a higher level of care, right? But we can do check-ins, we can see, and we can even, I've had patients leave me with some of their, whatever the means to take their life, or maybe self-injury tools. I've even had patients leave those with me, and I put them in a lockbox and I keep them until next week. And then I ask them, do you want them back? Right? And we have this conversation so you don't feel like you have to get rid of everything all at once and you have to commit to not wanting to take your own life. But can we play around with the thought that maybe that's not our goal anymore? Maybe we aren't so actively suicidal. Maybe we don't want to kill ourselves. And I know that seems, you're like, Katie, that doesn't seem like a good thing. It's a bridge statement. We're building a bridge from our suicidal plans into a place where we're like, you know what, I actually think I might enjoy my life a little. But even that thought can be super uncomfortable, and we can think like, no, I don't deserve to have that. Maybe I should just do it, right? And so we're playing around with a new way of thinking. We're playing around with the potential that we maybe don't want to do that anymore. And it's okay to be curious about those healthy thoughts, to feel uncomfortable with them, and to have someone hold on to some of your stuff for a little while, your supplies, and write about, then journal about how that made you feel to not have them. Because a lot of times we just like to have that out. Okay, what does it mean to have that out? What would it mean if I didn't have it for a week? Could I sustain? I know it doesn't seem right and it doesn't seem direct enough, but I'm here to tell you that it's exactly what we have to do, because we can't just black and white, all or nothing, in and out. We have to move ourselves slowly there so that it's sustainable, so that we know life can get better and we don't have those urges anymore. And it just takes some time to work our way there. But that's why safety plans are key, letting our therapist know, and considering leaving our supplies for a little while, see how that makes us feel. I hope those answers were helpful. Thank you all so much for writing in. Thank you for all your support and all your love. You guys are just wonderful. I love how you answer each other's questions and talk with each other in the comments. I love our community so much. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend, and I will see you next time. Bye.
You can ask her why breakups suck or why you've hit a plateau. Inquire all those questions you've always wanted to know.